Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. My name is Gene Barr. I'm your host for this week's program. Well, today we're going to be talking about criminal justice reform and the practice of medicine in Pennsylvania, and we'll start that right after we come back.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Our first guest today is Representative Sheryl Delozier. Representative Delozier represents the 88th House District here in Pennsylvania, which is part of Cumberland County, correct?
Absolutely.
There we go. We got that one. So welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on. So
Sure.
You were first elected in 2008, and you're currently a member of House leadership. I think it's the second session you've been a member of House leadership as caucus administrator, right?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
Great. So one of the things, and obviously you've been involved in a number of different things over the years in your House seat, and one of the things that you got involved in a few years ago was criminal justice reform.
Yes.
Why?
Well, you know, when we first started, it was not something certainly on my radar. I had a lot of work that I worked with victims' issues. And that's why they came to me originally, was because when you're going down the path of criminal justice reform, it's natural for people to say, we're letting everybody out of jail and they're just going to get out of jail free pass. And one of the concerns at that time was the fact that they need to balance the issue. So they not only needed to take a look at some common sense changes in our judicial system and from all different aspects. There's a lot of different ways that we've been kind of attacking that issue. But one of the biggest issues that they knew would come up in that balance was, what is the view of the victim? What is the view of the victim's family? So when they came to me and had that conversation, I had always been an advocate for that victim's voice within any of our legislation, and I guess I had gained a little bit of a reputation for that. So when they came to me to talk about it, that was really the aspect that I was to keep in mind and to remind people when we were going through some of these bills that, are we making sure that the victim's family, are we making sure that the victim themselves, if they are still with us, that they have their capability to have their voice, that it's not just running over their rights.
That is part of the process, is part of that. And the first big thing that I think the first major bill you got involved in was clean slate legislation. Yes. We're all familiar with, you fill out a job application, on there it says, have you ever been convicted of something other than a summary offense, et cetera. And people ticket. Always look at that. And right. And good reason to make that change. So that change was done in 18. Oh, wow, it's even further back than I thought. So tell us a little bit about what that means, what clean slate legislation did. Sure.
The clean slate, we were glad to actually, it was even about 5 years prior to 18 when it finally went through, because as you are well aware, the government process and the legislating process, sometimes I'm amazed that sometimes things run like the speed of light and you're like, whoa, and you get whiplash. Like, how did that happen so fast? And other things.
Plodding along.
Exactly. Making the sausage, as they say. And that did happen. We had a lot of iterations and everything, but the bottom line was the fact of the priority was second chances. The priority was saying to somebody, they have made a mistake, they were sentenced, they served their time, they are now back out in our communities.
Correct.
What is it that we want as a government? Do we want them to recidivate, or do we want to give them something to look forward to and something to work towards? So that was the premise of Clean Slate, was the fact that at that time, with that first bill, after 10 years, if you had not had any police interaction, that it would be sealed. It's not expunged. It doesn't go away. The police and law enforcement still have access. See it. Absolutely. Yep. But the capability of getting housing, the capability of getting a job, why are we standing in their way when they've earned, by having 10 years of a clean record, time and a second chance?
And it's not all offenses either.
It is not.
Certain offenses.
The first one that went through was misdemeanors, and the misdemeanors themselves were nonviolent. So we are talking. There was the exceptions. You know, obviously anything with a weapon, anything against a person, and so we're not talking about rapists and murderers here. We're talking about someone who shoplifted or got a DUI. You know, as a kid, they were drinking at 18 and not 21. Yes. You know, those types of things that shouldn't ruin your life in perpetuity. perpetuity. I mean, we're talking about what people don't think about sometimes is the fact that not only are we talking about people early in their lives trying to get a job, but think about the fact of someone going to go to Bethany or Messiah in our area.
Right.
You know, a lot of those senior homes have zero tolerance policy for any type of record.
Yeah.
And so then they turn that back around. They wouldn't get housing even as a senior.
Right.
So it's a second chance.
Yeah, let's cut away here for a moment. We'll come back. We'll talk a little bit more about this and some of the other issues around criminal justice and maybe a few other things too. Anyway, we'll be back after these messages.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Our guest today is State Representative Sheryl Delozier, and we're talking about criminal justice reform and specifically something called clean slate legislation that went through a number of years ago. Interestingly, Pennsylvania was the first state to pass clean slate legislation. We're not known for a lot of firsts, but I know you and some of your colleagues got national recognition for that because of the work that you put into that, correct?
Correct. Representative Harris and I teamed up at the beginning. So we did the work early on trying to sell the issue and educate people. And yes, we were the first state. So we were very proud of that fact. And after we did it, our federal government did it. You know, President Trump signed that first chance law in his first term, and many other states have emulated that. And we've actually learned from that as well, because we have not left it sit at the version in 2018.
Okay.
We've passed updates to go along with that. One of the most recent ones in I guess 23 was the fact of looking at low-level drug felonies.
Okay.
And we always joked, I always joke with Representative Harris that I would never do felonies, because felonies automatically, your brain goes to the worst of the worst.
Absolutely.
And I understand that, because mine did too. And the ability for us to turn that around, that thinking, as to a lot of the drug felonies were automatics, you know, that they were felonies, anything that dealt with drugs.
Yes.
But we had nonviolent drug offenses of addicts, people that were addicted. Now, we have people that have gotten themselves clean, they want to move on with their lives, and again, we're kind of standing in that way. So, again, we're talking about nonviolence. Nobody was hurt in any of their crimes, and a lot of times it was them just getting caught with their own drugs.
Correct.
So that second chance allows for some of them to deal with that as well.
Now, I think what helped turn this around was, in addition to the work of you and your colleagues, was the fact that people began to see this as a workforce issue.
Absolutely.
That is, we don't have enough people to fill the jobs that are out there. So how do we tap more into that? That's how child care, I think, came into that, certain transportation issues, and, of course, criminal justice reform worked to get people who could otherwise be great employees, made a mistake 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and now we bring them back in. Has that...
It has actually carried the banner in a lot of ways. Like, as you well know, the state chamber, when you were president, you know, you were a huge advocate on that issue, and they continue. The chamber continues to be that advocate. And we ended up with a very eclectic group of supporters, as we always joked about, because this is not a partisan issue. This is not a Republican issue or a Democrat issue. This is a people issue. This is a community issue. This is a cost-effective issue. This is an employee-employer issue. We had the unions with the chamber. We had you know, the ACLU and this and you know, all these different entities that were, you know, an AFP, and you know, and they never would be on a bill together ever, and so we were very glad to have them all together.
It was a good setup.
It was a good setup. But they had the ability to come together on that banner, you know, of the fact that this is better for our community.
So someone recently said to me that they're seeing on some job applications that people are saying, have you ever had your offenses or an offense or conviction sealed?
Oh.
How could someone answer that? Because theoretically, it's a bit of an end run around that.
It is very much so. I hadn't heard that one because they are, with the bill, once it is sealed, allowed to say that they have not had that offense. And so if they're now going to ask that question of being sealed, I'm not exactly sure. That's something that and that's why we need to evolve the bill so that we do keep up with changes, not only in our work environments, but all of those things like that. So maybe that's something that we have to take a look at.
That'd be great. And we're about at the end of time, so we'd love you to have you come back on and talk about some of those other things as they adjust, because potential workers need to know that, employers need to know that, so we understand that and we can get people back and be productive members of society.
Absolutely. And if someone is interested and they do have a record and they're interested in finding out if they are eligible, because it is an automatic process,
Got it. Yes.
to please reach out. Reach out to my office. I'm glad to be able to facilitate taking a look and see if they do are eligible. And or some people don't even know that they've been clean slated. So,
so they should do
it is
some
a public
checking and
record.
make sure that they're in.
If people are eligible or they're interested or think they might be, we've gotten a lot of phone calls about that. But please feel free to reach out.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Thanks for being on. We appreciate it. When we come back after this, we're going to talk a little bit about the practice of medicine here in Pennsylvania. See you in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Our next guest is Dr. Lynne Lucas-Fehm, who is the president of the Pennsylvania Medical Society. She is a board-certified radiologist in Bucks County. So, Dr. Fehm, thank you for being with us here this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I know we're going to talk a little bit today about what's called typically scope of practice, which I'll give my layman's explanation, then you can fill in all the things I got wrong. Scope of practice means how much an individual healthcare practitioner can do, whether they're an LPN, RN, certified registered nurse practitioner, or a physician's assistant. Is that kind of accurate?
Yes, it is.
Okay, good. I'm glad. So fill in a little more on that. So there's a bill out there that would allow greater flexibility or expand the scope of some other healthcare practices. Is that correct?
Yes, and specifically, I think the bill for consideration is talking about nurse practitioners. I will say that under the current PA code regulation, there is huge flexibility. And in fact, nurses can actually independently set up practices. The one thing that the code does require is a collaborative agreement under the current code. And what this means is that they have to have an agreement with a physician to be able to, in a sense, be available for any need that may enhance the better quality and safety of care for the patients. But it's a very, very flexible agreement in that the physician doesn't even have to be present within the nurse's practice if they wanted to set up their own. Okay. It can be done by telecommunication. So it's a very flexible bill, but I think I have not seen the new legislation, but my understanding is that potentially it might do away with those collaborative agreements, which it's, I think, the best of all worlds when we keep that collaborative agreement, because the best care for patients is really when doctors and nurses work together.
So tell us what the difference is between a registered nurse and a certified registered nurse practitioner. What's the level of education, et cetera? I don't think people know that.
Well, I think that is best for the nurses to actually answer for you. What I would be pointing out in supporting the keeping of the collaborative agreements between the doctors and the nurses is the difference between the training of the physicians and the training of the nurses. Both provide wonderful expertise to care for patients, but doctors, of course, have gone through 4 years of medical school as well as internship and residency. So, and there are obviously varying levels of training for nurses, but I would leave that for the nurses to speak to those differences. Okay.
Would expanding the scope, and again, you said that a lot of this exists already, but they have to have, I think you said, an affiliation with a doctor's office, and would allowing, say, independent setting up, would that allow for better health care outcomes in Pennsylvania? Would allow greater access? Tell us about what your concerns and issues are.
Yes, so just changing a regulation will not necessarily increase the ability for us to take care of areas that are underserved, such as certainly our rural communities. That's not going to immediately mean that there will be primary care there, which is so badly needed. As I said before, nurses could actually set up a practice right in those underserved areas now. Releasing the collaborative agreement in other states that have allowed this to occur does not always lead to the nurses with this larger scope of practice to actually go to those underserved areas. And in fact, some studies have shown that all it does is add more of the nurses doing this primary care in the same areas that there are already physicians. Certainly there's a shortage of primary care throughout our Commonwealth, throughout the country. But just changing the regulation won't necessarily, when this has been followed in other states, cure the problem.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on that, the number of doctors, when we come back, and we're going to take a quick break here. So we'll be back here in a moment with Dr. Lynne Lucas-Fehm.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania American Water. We keep life flowing across the Keystone State.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. We're talking here with Dr. Lynne Lucas-Fehm, who is president of the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Dr. Fehm, thanks for being on today. During the last segment, we're talking a little bit about what the situation is with physicians here in Pennsylvania. And look, we know that we've got a state that is getting older than most other states. The need for health care is still there. Still access issues, and you began to talk about the situation, particularly in rural areas. What's going on in rural areas?
Well, rural areas, and whether that be for doctors or any nurses that might want to practice there, it's very hard to maintain a practice in those areas. It's a financial challenge. Medicaid and Medicare reimbursements make it very difficult for someone to maintain a practice there. And we've seen closures that have occurred due to these, basically the financial challenges that have gone on. You also have private equity coming in. There was a recent closure and luckily now a reopening of the Sharon Medical Center. It was owned by a private equity firm. We had discussed on a different show the things that may occur with private equity, but basically that particular hospital in Mercer actually had to close, and luckily another investor has come in, and that medical center has reopened. But private equity has led to the closure of a lot of hospitals in rural areas where they are so needed. So I think that one of the things to consider is what is the best way to get more physicians there and nurse practitioners, but for physicians, student loan repayment programs where in order to get a loan paid back will require that a physician work in one of these underserved areas is certainly a way to get them better staffed. And I think other than changing regulations, which is being considered now, which is not a fix-all to do this, it might be better to consider how do we get physicians there and how do we get them to stay there.
So we have a much more serious situation in rural areas, largely because of Medicare, Medicaid, and we're not seeing that in some of the more urban or suburban areas then, so it's much more pronounced in the rural areas.
It's more pronounced in the rural areas. It's not, and it's really anywhere that you have your healthcare finances set up on things where we're seeing a cuts in the reimbursement. So in some of the urban areas that are also underserved, when you have the payer mix that's very reliant on something that's being cut, like potentially Medicaid, those healthcare institutions are going to suffer and potentially not be able to maintain providing care.
And so this impact on rural areas as well as some of the urbans, as you've pointed out, I assume that holds true for family medicine, general practice, as well as specialties, and I guess there's probably areas where specialties just aren't there at all, right?
Yes, recently there was a closure in rural Pennsylvania, the Cole, I believe, Medical Center, where it was closed due to difficulties in staffing and finances, that has created what's been termed an OB-GYN healthcare desert, where women would have to drive exceedingly long distances to obtain obstetrical and gynecologic care. So it can affect all specialties, but the hardest hit certainly is primary care, which is what everyone relies on, but it does then spill over into specialty care as well.
Is it fair to say that particularly, and again, I guess your concern is that with general practice, family medicine, those are the folks who are most directly tasked with the general overview of health and safety of their patients, correct?
They are. I mean, they are the front door, and they are the ones that determine, to use the word, triaging patients for what else they might need. And without them there, all primary care providers are just vital to the entire operation of healthcare. And we need more of them everywhere, in particular rural areas and underserved areas in the cities.
Is the overall number of doctors in Pennsylvania holding steady? Is it declining? Is it increasing? Where are we with that? As time goes on, we're going to see what the effects of some of the legislation has gone on. At this point, holding steady, but it needs to grow is the thing, because we have an aging population. We have higher utilization of some services. So we need more physicians, and maintaining the status quo is not going to be able to serve the growing needs of our population. Well, Dr. Fehm, thank you for being on with us today. We'd love to have you come back and talk about some of these issues as they develop. So thank you, and greatly appreciate you being on here today.
Thank you very much.
Okay. All right.